and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who would like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Hi Helen, how are you today?
I'm excellent, thank you. How are you?
Oh, you stole my word. I was going to say excellent today. I am wonderfully well, thank you. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, which is a bit of a specialist subject for me.
It is,
so
isn't
I'm
it?
pleased that we're getting the opportunity to talk about it and how it comes into the coaching room.
And what is the topic today?
The topic today is resilience.
Okay, so resilience has possibly got some negative connotations for people, especially in the medical world, hasn't it?
Yes, and I think the system doesn't help when it comes to resilience. And obviously we need a resilient health service. So there is some requirement for resilience for the whole system, but that tends to be at the expense of the individuals in the system. So if we think about the whole COVID situation, and lots of incredible resilient people demonstrated their resilience throughout COVID and were put under a lot of pressure, asked to be very flexible, to do different jobs to the ones they were doing, and to show up in a different way, but to be resilient throughout and not take time off and just be strong in that moment. So that was during COVID. And then after COVID, obviously there's been a bit of a backlog in medical care, there's been waiting lists increases and things like that. And the same people are being asked to step up and fill the gap and reduce the backlog.
And continue to be
resilient. And I think that's why when people talk about resilience in the coaching room, it's for medical teams, it's almost like it's being done to them. They're being made to be resilient when actually they're already demonstrating resilience, but someone's going, well, but we need more. So I think,
And I don't think it's solely the medical profession. I think it suits organisations often to promote the idea of resilience, possibly at the expense of the well-being of employees.
Yes, and obviously well-being is now firmly embedded in most big organisations. They have a well-being initiative of some description. So, yeah, I'm all in favour of well-being. You know, it'd be odd for me not to be in favour of it. But I say, I think sometimes organisations get it wrong. You know, and a bowl of fruit on the desk and, you know, dress down Friday doesn't resolve the overworking and the stress that they put their people under. And I think paying real attention to well-being is something that most organisations could do better at.
Yes, that's a very polite way of putting it. So, before we go on to discuss resilience, just tell us how you got involved in studying the topic.
So resilience has been with me really since about 2015. So I was asked to run some resilience workshops for a theatre organisation for their staff. And I thought, okay, I think I can do that, but I probably need a bit of work to bring myself up to speed. So I started to explore resilience, and as I started to explore it, bouncing back was kind of it, really. That was the message I was getting. Well, resilience is about bouncing back. And for me, I'd been through a period of about 10 years where a number of things had happened in my life that had left me feeling less than resilient. So, and feeling like, well, I couldn't have bounced back in that time. That wasn't a thing. I just had to get through it somehow. So I recognised that it was a bit of a throwaway, well, bouncing back is what resilience is. So I started to explore it. And I thought, well, the best way to explore it is to write about it. So I started writing a blog. And I thought, the only way I'm going to keep going and show some resilience is to tell people I'm doing it and commit to it. So I started a blog called 365 Days of Resilience and put it out there. I'm going to write about resilience for a year. And I had lots of people, friends of mine, family saying, yeah, you'll never do that. That's great. You couldn't do that. But I did. And actually, after about 20 days, I had no idea what was going on. I thought, well, I've said everything I've got to say about resilience now, and was looking at a blank page thinking, I don't know what to write anymore. So I actually wrote about the resilience of staring at a blank page but continuing to write in some way. So that 20th day was all about a blank page. So, but I did carry on and managed to write for in total 366 days.
You chose a leap year, didn't you?
I chose a leap year. Damn, an extra day crept in there. So by the time I'd finished, and at the same time I was doing a master's degree in coaching and chose as my topic, because I was writing about resilience anyway, I chose resilience in coaching as a topic for my dissertation. So again, did some research around it, so talked to lots of people about their resilience and really got a handle on what it was, what it wasn't, and the complexities of resilience and how it shows up. So that's been my background. And then I had every intention of writing a book to continue, but you know what? I'd almost done with resilience. I thought, yeah, I've kind of said all I've got to say. But then I was offered the opportunity to write a book. So a publisher approached me with the idea of a book around resilience in the workplace. And yeah, that was 2021. And of course, we'd come through COVID. So there was lots of new data, new research coming out about COVID and resilience through COVID. So I thought, actually, I've got some new things to say.
So good timing.
Yeah. So the book took about 6 months to write, but that's now out there, available in all good booksellers.
And we'll put a link in the show notes.
Thank you. So Agile Resilience. And I think the title kind of reflects my views on resilience, that it isn't just about bouncing back. We need to demonstrate some agility in our resilience, and there are different ways of showing up and being resilient that are not just about bouncing back.
Okay, so all this research, where do we start?
Let's start with the definition.
Let's do that.
So I came up with a new definition as a result of all my research, because I recognised there were different ways of being resilient. So my definition, it's a long one, but I think I'll explain it once I've done it. The ability to choose whether to maintain or adapt your thoughts, feelings and behaviours while encountering challenges and periods of adversity, equipping yourself with new insights to support your continuing life journey. Quite a full, rich definition.
Yeah, a bit more than bouncing back.
A bit more than bouncing back. So first thing I want to say is that within the definition, it's about an ability. So an ability is it's not a trait, so it's not something we're born with. I think some people have some physiological advantages when they're born that might lend themselves to being more resilient, but it is definitely something that we can develop. So that ability to be resilient is a practice. We can do things to help us be more resilient. So that's important. And the ability to choose whether to maintain or adapt our thoughts, feelings, and behaviour. So again, it's about choice and recognising that in most circumstances we do have some choice about how we demonstrate resilience that's useful to us. So if we have an organisation that's saying, well, you have to be strong and you have to not take time off and you have to just show up as that being strong definition of resilience, then that might not serve us well at all. So it's about us recognising what we need for ourselves and being flexible in how we approach our lives to demonstrate the resilience that's going to be useful for us. So standing strong is one definition, bouncing back is another common definition. But I think that flexibility of approach might be really useful. Now, and I don't mean by that adapting to what the organisation wants you to be in order to be resilient. So like I say, in COVID, there's a requirement for people to drop everything they're doing and go into an acute situation to support. Now, that might be important in the moment, but we might need to flex away from that. We might need to demonstrate some flexibility for ourselves, but that's a choice we make to nurture our own resilience. So obviously, whilst encountering challenges, that's the most obvious place that we are going to notice our resilience is when we come up against adversity and face challenge. And I think we can practice being resilient before that. So if you think about firefighters, they don't suddenly go into a fire situation and demonstrate resilience without practicing. They know what they're going to do. They've rehearsed it 100 times before.
They know what it's like to be in a smoky environment, that kind of thing.
So I think it's the same with any form of resilience. We can use resilience practices to nurture our own resilience and develop it, and develop that ability to be resilient. So I do see it as a practice. I don't think it's something that you just are or not. I think you have to take steps to be resilient. So the periods of overcoming periods of challenge and adversity, And so equipping yourself with new insights to support your continuing life journey. So I think, again, it's not about, okay, I was resilient in that moment and that's it, it's over. It's okay, that was a tough time for me. What did I learn from that, and how can I use that information to be more resilient in the future?
And that links in with that idea of bouncing forward, of post-traumatic growth, or finding a new way to be after a time of difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay, so some people might just turn up in the coaching room and say, I need to work on my resilience. But some other people might not. How could we spot the need for working with a coachee around their resilience?
I think even if people show up talking about, well, I need to be more resilient, it's useful to understand what resilience means to them. So one of the best ways that I work with clients in understanding their resilience is asking them to draw it.
Okay.
And I've done this so many times with coachees. So sometimes people will draw a mountain, and so that's what resilience looks like for me. Other people will draw an oak tree. So that's very much that standing strong type of resilience. Other people will draw a willow tree bending in the wind, or a reed bending in the wind. Other people will draw a spring bouncing back. Other people will draw perhaps Superwoman. They'll draw themselves as Superwoman, standing strong, handling everything. So if we can understand what their definition of resilience is, and drawing is a great way to draw that out, then we know what we're working with. And it might, again, be, okay, that's what you see as resilience, and you say you need some help with that. How is standing strong going to serve you in this situation? Because their definition might be a mountain. You go, well, I need to stand strong. But actually, sometimes it's not about that. It's about that flexibility of thinking around it and go, what's going to serve me well in this situation? But I think if we start with that understanding of what their idea of resilience is, we're off to a good start. But then if we think about how other people are showing up and not talking about resilience, they might be on the verge of burnout. They might be so overwhelmed with what's going on. They might be struggling with anxiety. Just the pressure of work might be something that's showing up for them. They might not have any motivation for the work that they're doing. I think a lot of us as coaches experience that in lockdown, after lockdown, with people languishing. They just weren't feeling quite as motivated as they were before COVID had happened. So a lot of exploration there of, okay, well, that's how you're feeling now, and what you feel is a lack of motivation, and that means you're not being resilient. So let's explore that, and what is going to motivate you, and how do you want to be motivated?
So all of those elements that you've just mentioned, there's probably more, could indicate, let's look at this resilience element with you. Yeah. Let's explore that.
They could be being told they're not very resilient. That could be the message they're getting from other people, that they're not showing up in a way that looks resilient to others. But again, systems, organisations have their own agenda when it comes to resilience.
And other people in your life. Yeah.
So you might have a boss who, because you don't stay past 5 o'clock of an evening, which are your hours that you're contracted for, they might see you as not being resilient because you're not there all the time.
When in fact you're just working your hours. Working the hours you paid for.
Yeah. I came across a lovely expression the other day, the balance of exchange. And I think it applies well to that psychological safety in an organisation. If the balance of exchange is wrong, then people are going to head for burnout, or at least head for disillusionment. So they're going to head for burnout, or at least head for feeling resentment, feeling disillusioned, because the balance is wrong. And I think that in the medical world, that's a huge problem, because people are expected to work unpaid when the situation demands, and that's quite often all of the time. So if the balance of exchange is wrong, we're going to struggle. Doesn't mean we're not resilient. It just means that someone somewhere has got the system wrong.
And equally, if we think we're being resilient, but we're perhaps being resilient in a way that isn't useful at that time, that in itself is going to knock our resilience. If we're trying to be strong when we need to flex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then we're going to...
Or if we're flexing in a way that the organisation wants us to flex, but that's not serving us well as an individual.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can, be accommodating and do as people ask us to do, show that flexibility in the workplace, but it's not a flexibility in our resilience, that we're not really looking after ourselves.
It's interesting, all these topics that we talk about, I can see how so many of them are interlinked, and this conversation is reminding me a little bit of our last episode 22, on conflict styles. And so I think that for anyone listening, thinking about resilience, obviously listen to the end of this podcast, and then perhaps go back and listen to episode 22, which could help you with thinking about how you react in those moments of challenge at work.
Yeah, good.
So, Tom, how would we start to work with a client around their resilience?
I think defining what resilience is for them, but then having that conversation about the broader definition of resilience and how that flexibility, that agile resilience might fit into their way of being. So just giving them a little bit more of an idea of how flexible resilience could be for them. Mm-hmm. I think once we've done that, actually exploring the components of resilience that my research has demonstrated to me are important for most people. And I have a model which we will share in the show notes. Mm-hmm. And that looks at 8 different elements of resilience that show up in the acronym Telegram.
Oh, I love an acronym.
And I do too, but the big problem with acronyms, I spend so much time trying to fit the model into an acronym. But I have 8 elements, and they do neatly fit into a Telegram label. So the first element is thinking, and this is 2 things. One is looking at how they're thinking about a situation at the moment. So for the coachee, when they tell you their story of what's going on, there may be some unhelpful thinking going on. Maybe some negative thinking or some thinking patterns that have crept into their way of being that aren't particularly helpful. It might be just how they're perceiving a situation, and it might not be real. So we'll explore unhelpful thinking patterns, try and bring them out of those, but also look at perhaps some negativity in their thinking. On the flip side of that, we might engage them around how they might think more positively, some optimism, or some realistic optimism. We don't want to be too fantastical in our thinking. So some positive thinking, and obviously we, on our course, talk about positive psychology, and we might be using some positive psychology interventions to look at how people are thinking, and perhaps bringing some joyful moments into people's everyday way of thinking about things, and some purpose and all sorts of things that engage around optimism and positivity. So that's one element, just the way people think about their world. Beyond that, we're going to look at emotional intelligence. So that's the E of the Telegram model. So not only their thinking, whether that's negative or positive, and how that shows up, but also how that is then resulting in emotions, and how they're using their emotional intelligence in a workplace setting or in a home life setting, but just navigating that space that they're in, perhaps using some emotional intelligence. And this comes from the work of Daniel Goleman, who had a model for that, and it looks at our self-awareness around our emotions, our self-management around our emotions, how we actually manage ourselves in difficult situations, our social awareness, so how we, that kind of social interaction, how we view that, and also how we manage those relationships. So it's very much that those 4 quadrants are important in terms of emotional intelligence. But that ability to work with our emotions and to recognise emotions in others, have some empathy, is all part and parcel of our resilience. We are social creatures, so we do interact with others on a constant basis. So having some awareness of the impact that people might have on us can be really important. So that's the second element.
So that's that's the E.
E, the first E. We've got 2 E's in Telegram, but that's the first E. Mm-hmm. The third one might seem a little bit strange in terms of resilience, but it's actually leisure activities. So it's how we spend our leisure time away from work, because work can be all-consuming.
And whether we actually have any leisure time at all.
Yeah, it could be, work, sleep. So I think that's important to actually start to plan some leisure time and what we do with our leisure time, and ways that we replenish our energy. So again, that's something that we might spend some time with our coaches, just how do they organise their lives in a way that ensures that they remain resilient. Beyond that, we will look at energy, and the basic components of energy. And I know you do a lot of work
Yeah.
around this. So what are your
One of my favourite.
basic components of energy, Helen?
Well, most definitely we'd look at sleep
Yep.
as a
Absolutely.
foundation, hydration, nutrition, movement.
Yes, I was just thinking movement. Yes, so exercise. So
Yeah, I've taken to calling it movement because some people react to exercise.
Yes,
So,
I see that. Yes, but those basic. I'm not too fussed about hydration myself. It's in my book. I do talk about it, but I think most research would suggest that, on the whole, people regulate their fluid intake quite well.
Yeah.
And I know there's some research that suggests you should have 2 litres of fluid every day, but then other research that says 1 litre is okay. So it's always a bit of a strange one, the hydration. But I think most people are going to be hydrated. But certainly in terms of nutrition, exercise or movement, sleep underpins everything. If you're not getting enough sleep, then... And we know this, and it's such a dangerous place to be in the medical world, isn't it, if you haven't had enough sleep. And then nutrition. So are we fueling ourselves well? So that's energy. Beyond that, we will look at growth and learning. And I say my definition of resilience includes that gaining new insights that will help us in the future. So I think any adversity that we face has some learning in it for us. So we can take something from it and improve our lives in the future by having gone through some challenge. And I think the work of Carol Dweck and her growth mindset is really useful to think about in that sense, and bringing that into the coaching room can be really helpful when people have self-limiting beliefs. Say, well, I can't possibly do that. And it's that, well, not yet. But actually, how could you go about getting to the stage where you can do it? So I think it's really useful to talk about relationships, and we mentioned this in terms of emotional intelligence and that relationship management, but just recognising, and this was something that came through strongly for me in terms of my research around what made people resilient, that relationships are really important on both sides of the coin. So if you have people in your life that are causing you pain, that's a real problem for your resilience, or just, making life uncomfortable for you. So if you've got a boss that's particularly demanding and not very empathetic, that can be really difficult. And on the flip side, having people that support how you wish to be and support your resilience is probably the most important element of this model.
yeah,
I think without that social support, we're struggling.
absolutely.
No one lives in isolation, so no one can do anything without someone around to support them. So I think that's a really important element. We're almost at the end of the model, so we've got to the A of the Telegram model, and that's attitude. And attitude shows up in lots of different ways. So I suppose probably the most common attitude that people would cite in terms of resilience is determination, which I think has its part to play. But it's not everything, and grit is something that tends to be labelled as resilience as well. And if I think about my own life, I wouldn't have said I was particularly someone that was determined or had grit, but I just hadn't found the thing that I was passionate about and really wanted to get involved in. And now within my coaching, my resilience journey in coaching's lasted 14 years and shows no sign of stopping. So I'm constantly learning, constantly pushing forward with that. So I think in that sense, that determination is just something being important enough for you to want to continue with it. But there are other elements of our attitude. So acceptance is something that we might well want to include in part of our resilience approach. And also self-efficacy is a really important part of it. So not just determination and acceptance, but if we think that going back to what I was saying about Carol Dweck and a growth mindset, if we think we can't do it yet, but we can take the steps necessary in order to accomplish something. So if you want to run a marathon and the furthest you've ever run is a mile, it's that recognising that if you increase your training regime and have a plan, that eventually you would be able to run a marathon. It doesn't matter that you've never run one before, it's just that self-efficacy, well, I can take the steps necessary. So I think that's really important in terms of resilience. And the final element of our model is meaningful purpose. So this is doing work or having a life that for you provides you with a purpose that is meaningful for you. It doesn't have to be meaningful for anyone else, but is meaningful for you. Now, I think most people in the medical profession have that in abundance. They have a sense.
Absolutely.
They have a calling. They have a vocation, which is great. And so I think they will always have that meaningful purpose, unless they've gone into medicine because it's what their dad wanted them to do, or they were just very bright at school and couldn't think of anything else, so ended up in medicine. And that just doesn't fulfill that meaningful purpose, that they don't really like what they do at all. But I think that's obviously a conversation about future paths, which might show up in the coaching. But if they do have that sense of meaningful purpose as a medical professional, then how does the system, how does the environment they're in support that? And does that knock it out of them? You know, we've had a lot of people come through our coaching training that are looking for something else or something in addition to what they do, because what they do isn't providing that meaningful purpose. Now, many people on the course reconnect with that sense of meaningful purpose, and they go back to what they were doing already and settle into it in a new way because they've seen it through a new lens and gained a new insight, and go back to having a meaningful purpose. But I think that's an important part of anyone's resilience, is that, does my life make sense to me? Do I have some connection to where I'm going with it and the activities I'm engaged in, and does that bring me a sense of meaningful purpose?
So that sounds like a great model to work through, and it sounds like you can bring all sorts of approaches to coaching in to discuss those different elements. Would you work through in that order, or would you pick out one of the elements to focus on? How would you work with that model as a coach?
I think every coaching conversation is going to be different, so people are going to show up in different ways. So it's that back to meeting coachees where they are. So if they come talking about their inner voice and the negative thinking they're engaged in, then we'd start there. If they come saying I've really lost my sense of purpose in my role, then we'll start there. But we've got a model there, and you could use this going back to a much earlier episode on our podcast where we explored the wheel of life. Episode 4. You could have a wheel of resilience. So these are 8, so you could dissect that wheel into 8 segments, plot on it on a scale of 1 to 10. Where do you think you are in terms of your resilience on each of these elements? And people could suggest where they are, and that might give you a guide as to where it's useful to focus your coaching session. But I don't think it matters particularly where we start. It's just how someone is showing up in the coaching room is important.
What a great adaptation to the wheel.
Yes.
So if a coach is looking to explore resilience more and further their knowledge and awareness of resilience and what it means and how they can work with a client, where might they start?
They might start with my book, Agile Resilience.
Yes. What a
Which
great
is available
idea.
from all good. It's on Amazon. So yes, I think it is a good place to start. So obviously I'm a coach, and it's written with a coaching framework in mind. I at the end of each chapter, there's an activity for someone to engage in. So there's lots of useful coaching tools in there that you could use as a coach. I think it's useful for you to increase your awareness of those different elements of resilience anyway. But there's also some useful coaching tools that you could draw out and use in your coaching practice. So being a little bit flippant, but I think it is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put a link in the show notes so that people can take a look at that.
Lovely.
And you've got some online resources that are linked for the readers as well.
Yes, I have. That are in the show notes.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of expertise on resilience. Please feel free to subscribe. Maybe give us a review if you are enjoying our podcast content. And we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.